Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Empowered Psychology Podcast. My name is Cristela Villatoro, and I am the founder and the host of Empowered Psychology. Before I get into my story, I feel like it is very important to share why I started Empowered Psychology. So, I have lupus. I have had lupus since I was 16 years old, and I was actually diagnosed with lupus on my 17th birthday. And it has been a journey. My story is very long, hence why there's going to be a few parts to this story. But I have had two flares, two very aggressive flares that both presented themselves and manifested in very different ways. But luckily, I am here alive and healthy. After my first flare, it's not that I didn't want to tell my story, but I kind of just lived my life. And I honestly forgot about what I went through. But after going through my second flare, I realized how much of a blessing it is to not only be alive, but to overcome an illness like lupus twice. The first flare almost took my life, and the second flare almost took my quality of life. And now that I am back in remission and I have my health back, I feel like I know it is my responsibility to educate people about lupus and also inspiring other lupus survivors to live a healthy lifestyle and know that there is treatment for this illness and that you can survive and live a life full of destiny, full of hope, full of love, and it is possible. And also, I want to give a voice to other people who are going through illnesses that may be visible or invisible and bring awareness in general about physical and mental health. So, a bit about my journey in the field of psychology. Well, I discovered my love for psychology during my sophomore year of high school when I took AP Psychology. So, shout out to Miss Chambers. And I really was inspired by the knowledge I had acquired throughout that class and the power of the mind. And I used that knowledge the following year when I almost lost my life to lupus nephritis. And ever since then, I knew that psychology was my passion and was going to be my future. And I went on to study psychology and sociology, and I got a minor in educational psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. Shout out to UT! And I'm currently a master's candidate for psychology at New York University. So yes, shout out to me. So yes, it is safe to say that I am quite the psychology nerd and I am an aspiring psychologist. So through my passion for psychology and through the experiences that I have faced at such a young age, really that's what birthed Empowered Psychology, which is an educational platform and community that gives a voice to those with visible and invisible illnesses with the hopes of empowering other people to be able to overcome adversity and create their dream lives. And I truly believe through these testimonies that I'm going to be sharing with my story and other people's stories, and also through education, that we can empower people to use their minds in very productive ways in order to overcome whatever it is that they're going through. So thank you guys so much for being here and taking the time to really listen to my story, and let's get started. So let's start with my life before lupus. my lupus diagnosis. So I would say I was healthy, but now that I'm older and I've studied things like psychology and sociology, and I've looked into more education about my illness, I would say that my perception and my definition of health has changed drastically. And although I may have physically appeared healthy, I don't think I was really healthy. There is a link between autoimmune diseases, and lupus is an autoimmune disease, and severe childhood traumas that I know for a fact contributed to my diagnosis, because I did experience childhood traumas. Also, I ate whatever I wanted and developed bad eating habits, especially starting at the age of 14. I mean, I feel like people would have considered me healthy because I was a dancer, I was a gymnast, and honestly, I was a very vibrant kid slash teenager. Very active in school. I was in AP classes. My goal was always to go to UT, which is something that, thank God, I was able to accomplish. So yeah, overall I was healthy, but really I wasn't, especially mentally. But one thing I do want to highlight is that never did I ever imagine that I would ever get sick the way I did. Growing up, I would always see commercials like the St. Jude commercials and feel so sad, but it never crossed my mind that something like that would ever happen to me. And it can happen to anybody, and it did happen to me. So that was my life before my diagnosis. So over the years, I would ask myself about the trajectory of the development of my illness. And I feel like now I really do have a clear picture of what that looks like, although I will never truly know how this happened or why, but I do have an idea. I would say that my first visible symptom was present my spring semester of sophomore year. So this was around, I would say, February to April of 2015. I really do feel like I experienced my first symptom. Now, my first symptom was actually depression. And I know it was depression because I no longer cared about any of the things that meant the world to me. Now, at the time, what meant the world to me? Well, school. My goal was to go to the University of Texas at Austin, and in order to get automatic admission to the school, I had to be at a very high ranking in my school, and my school was extremely competitive. I think at that time it was like the top 6%. So school was a huge priority for me, and I would say I was a pretty excellent student, but around this time I started not to care, and I didn't know why. I didn't question why I no longer cared, but I really no longer cared. I did the bare minimum. I wouldn't come prepared for any tests. I didn't fail, but I was used to making A's, and I was no longer making A's. And even the teachers started to notice, and they would ask me, like, what's going on? Do you not want to go to UT anymore? And I'd just be like, no, that's not what it is. But yeah, I really just stopped caring about my goals in terms of my academic goals, but also two other things that really meant the world to me around that time were my friends in dance. And I actually quit dance. That's crazy because I can't imagine going one day without dancing. And at that time I was like, well, I'm done with dance, and I didn't care about it anymore. And then also my relationships, I wouldn't say they were deteriorating, but I wasn't really focused on my relationships anymore. And I'm a very talkative person. I'm one of those people that has to have friends. I mean, I feel like everyone has to have friends, but me, I have to have friends and I have to be around people. And around that time, I really just didn't want to be around anybody. And then this just put the cherry on top of the ice cream. I actually got heartbroken for the very first time. So like I said, my first symptom happened around February through April, and I remember the day, June 6th, I got my heart broken for the very first time, and this just threw me into a severe depression. And I remember that entire summer, I just slowly started to lose my hope for life. And by the end of summer, I felt like I had nothing to live for. I didn't care about anything. So yeah, that was the beginning of my junior year. And I no longer cared about anything or anyone. And now we're in August, and at this point, I was suicidal. Suicide was something I was aware of, but I had never had a suicidal thought. Now that I'm looking back, this was very scary because these thoughts were very intense and intrusive and controlling. They really drove me to believe things that weren't true and to almost do things that I can't even imagine doing today. And thank God I never did. But this is where I really started to speak out. And at the time, it really did look like rebellion. I feel like from an outside point of view, it would look like rebellion. But now that I look back, I was pleading for help. And I no longer wanted to go to school. I actually no longer wanted to be anywhere near my space where I grew up. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I have grown up here my entire life. I luckily have a lot of family here, all my friends, and I no longer wanted to be here. I hated waking up every morning. I hated going to school. I hated being in my own home, in my own bed, and this is unheard of for me because I make sure that I create spaces and places with people I enjoy and the things that I love. And at this point, I really just didn't want to be here. I hated everything about my life and where I was, and I didn't care. I didn't even want to go to school. So I actually ended up moving to Honduras for my junior year of high school. I really want to thank mi tía Sonia and mi tío Alfredo and my cousins Jose Alfredo, Carlos Francisco, Fernando, and my cousin Blanqui, and my other great friend Marilu for giving me the opportunity to go to Honduras. And my stay did end there tragically, but honestly, I will never forget the amazing experiences that I had there. My Spanish wasn't that good when I got there, but by the time I left, I spoke perfect Spanish. I really got in tune with my culture and my family, and honestly, it overall, it was an amazing experience. Luckily, I created so many relationships there and have bonds with people that to this day I still bond with and talk to. So I am very grateful for them. But yeah, I moved to Honduras, and I remember when the plane landed, I felt an immediate relief. And I got some relief from the depression because I felt hope again. And I was happy that I was in a place where I could start over and no one knew me. And yeah, I just remember being extremely happy and ready to embark on the new journey. I feel like around this time when I got to Honduras is when I really started to see the physical changes in myself, but those were, I think those started to present themselves around June, But because I was so depressed, I really didn't even look in the mirror or have any recollection of seeing the changes happen. But as soon as I got to Honduras, one thing about my family is that they are very brutally honest, and they immediately started to point out what was wrong with my hair. Hair loss in particular has been one of the symptoms that I experienced throughout both of my lupus flares. And at that time, my hair was very damaged. It was very thin. It was very frizzy, and it was coming out in chunks. It would fall out a lot. But because I was so depressed, I didn't really care. It just looked horrible. So my aunt tried a few different shampoos to see if it would go away, and it didn't. So this is when I got the keratin treatment, which kind of hid that symptom for a while. So far I had these symptoms, multiple mental illness symptoms, and hair loss. So this was around, I would say, August to about end of October. Now we're heading into November, and this is where I start to get extremely tired. I would fall asleep all the time. It didn't matter where or when. I was falling asleep on the way to school. I was falling asleep at the mall. I was falling asleep at the restaurant. Any chance to sleep that I got, I would sleep. And I didn't know why, but I just assumed I was very tired. And I did think it was kind of odd. So I actually remember like one night I was like, okay, let me sleep for 12 hours tonight. And I did. And the next day I was still falling asleep everywhere. So no matter how much I slept, it really wasn't enough because I was always tired. So now we hit December, and this is where I started to really look a lot different and notice that I looked a lot different because the holidays were coming, and I was in Honduras where it's hot throughout the year, very tropical. And we were planning to go on a trip to Roatán, which is an island in Honduras. We were planning to go there in January. So that's when I was like, okay, I have to start looking good. And I noticed that honestly, I was overweight and very puffy. I remember looking in the mirror and being like, what is going on? Like, how did this even happen? Like, I was so overweight, but now that I look back, it was pretty much water retention. But I could not believe how much weight I had gained. I was overweight. And I finished the semester, and then we were off to the holidays. And yeah, this is where everything started to go downhill. Now, an important thing to state is that this was in December of 2015, and around that time is when the ZIKA virus epidemic began. And it actually began in Brazil, infected other countries in the Americas from April 2015 to November 2016. So yeah, I knew that there was Zika, and I actually had family members who had Zika, but at the time I really just didn't think that it would happen to me. Well, the holidays go by, Christmas, New Year, and then boom, it's January 7th. And this is where everything really started to go downhill. I was diagnosed with Zika virus, and January 7th was honestly one of the most horrible days of my life. So a bit about Zika. The symptoms include headache, fever, painful or red eyes, rash, muscle pain, and joint pain, and usually last 2 to 7 days. And on January 7th, I noticed my eyes were super red. I had a fever, and not only that, but I had cuts and ulcers all over my mouth and nose. It was honestly one of the most painful days of my life because I couldn't get relief from any angle. I had a fever, my head hurt, and not only that, but it hurt to even hydrate because of all the ulcers and cuts I had in my mouth. I couldn't really do anything for about 3 days, and like I said, this was honestly one of the most painful days of my life. I recovered from ZIKA and went back to school, and honestly, this is where more and more things started to happen. So I started to notice that I would have severe nose congestion, and I would have to blow my nose literally every 7 minutes. It was pretty bizarre. So around this time, mid-January, is where the new symptoms started to emerge. And this is where I started to experience severe migraines, and these migraines wouldn't go away. The medicine that I took for the migraines would calm the migraine down for about 4 hours, but then it would be back even stronger and more powerful than before. It was extremely painful. And at this point, I was pale. I was back in school, and my teachers were asking me why I was so pale and telling me that I needed to go eat more beans, that I needed iron. So yes, I was very pale, and something very odd happened where I lost 18 pounds, honestly, overnight. It probably wasn't overnight, but I feel like it was, like, in my opinion, I feel like it was quite quick, because like I said, I had gained a lot of weight. And then I remember we were getting ready to go to that trip to Roatán, and I look in the mirror and I'm so skinny out of nowhere. I remember being like, whoa, I didn't even have to do much and I'm ready for this vacation. Like, how did this even happen? So yeah, I lost a total of 18 pounds, and yeah, it was crazy. Well, the last symptom that I developed around mid-January was a rash. Now, this rash was on my chest, around my armpits, and on my face, and I looked scary at this point. I remember my teachers constantly asking me if I was okay, and I went to a few doctors, and they said I had mononucleosis, ZIKA, and anemia. And at the time, they did check my blood work, and I actually had a hemoglobin of 8. And the normal hemoglobin is around, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 12. But yeah, it's not 8, okay? So they put me on a plan of treatment, and at this point, I'm just waiting to get better. But each day, I just felt worse and worse and worse. Physically and mentally, I was weak, I was pale, I was depressed, and honestly, I felt like I was dying. I would joke that I was dying, but now I know, and throughout my story, you guys will know that I was actually dying. So now it is February 1st of 2016. So far, these were my symptoms: extreme fatigue, dizziness. I had a rash on my face, chest, and armpits. I had ulcers and cuts in my mouth, and I had ulcers in my nose. I had red eyes. I had extreme migraine headaches. I was experiencing a lot of hair loss. I had an unintentional weight loss of a total of 18 pounds. I had severe congestion, pale skin, and severe depression. So it's February 1st, 2016, and I went to school, and I remember I was in Mr. Ponce's class, and he is a very strict man, very strict, and he was looking at me for a hot minute, and he looked really, really, really concerned. And he asked me, Cristela, are you okay? I kept saying yes, but honestly, like, I knew I was not okay. But these doctors that I was seeing, they told me I was fine and it was only a matter of time before I got better. So I just trusted that, but I knew I was not okay. Well, we were on the computers in this class, and all of a sudden, I literally could not see out of my left eye. It was honestly one of the craziest moments of my life. I remember I was looking at the screen and all of a sudden I couldn't see, and I would like close my eyes and open them multiple times to see if it would go away, but it wasn't going away. So I told Mr. Ponce that I needed to go to the nurse, and I was on my way to the nurse, and I actually had to walk down the stairs to go to the nurse, and this is where I ended up passing out. So I passed out, and I really have no idea how long I was on the floor. But I know this happened while I was walking down the stairs, which is way easier than walking up the stairs. So I was pretty shocked. And when I got up, I knew that I needed to get to the nurse as soon as possible. And on the way there, I started to see spots in my vision. So once I saw the spots, that's where I really started to freak out. And I called my mom and I told her that I need to go to a good doctor as soon as possible, because the other doctors I was seeing clearly did not know what they were talking about or how to treat me. So I ended up at the nurse, and the nurse is honestly looking at me crazy. She's like, yeah, you're really sick. You need to go to the doctor now. Like, I'm not going to be able to help you. You look very sick. So I waited for my aunt to come get me and take me to the doctor. And she ended up taking me to Honduras Medical Center, where I met the man who saved my life. Dr. Moncada is honestly the reason I am alive today. He is an amazing human. He's an amazing physician. He's an expert at what he does. And he is the reason I am here today. I am forever and ever grateful for him. And I remember I got to the office, and honestly, doctor's appointments are very different in Honduras. The doctor actually talks to you and actually knows you and is up to date with your life. So I got to the office and we sat down to talk. He just asked me about me. You know, I told him, oh yeah, I'm from Houston, but I moved here to Tegucigalpa to go to school, and I'm currently at El Campo and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, my son goes to El Campo and I love visiting Houston and blah, blah, blah. We were just talking. But I remember him cutting me off and being like, you are really, really pale, and you're actually abnormally pale, and I need to check you now. And he looked at my diagnosis that I had received from the previous doctors, and he was like, a hemoglobin of 8, like that is way too low. I need to examine you now. So I remember I laid down and he started his examination. And I just remember his eyes, they went blank. Like they widened, but they went blank. And this is where something really interesting happened to me mentally. So I would describe this experience as a regression, which is a defense mechanism where a person deals with stress by behaving in an immature, age-inappropriate way. And I really felt like I regressed to the mindset of like an innocent 4-year-old who could not comprehend what was happening. And at this point, I was just very out of touch with reality. And also I was very sick. So, and now looking back, there was no way I was going to get in touch with reality. And I think that's what got me through the next 2 days of hell. So he said, oh my God. And he told my aunt, I need to speak with you outside. And like I said, mentally, I was a 4-year-old child. And I just remember looking around the room being like, whoa, it's such a pretty room. I really felt like, I'm glad, actually, now that I look back, I'm glad that really happened, because I don't think my body had been able to handle a mental breakdown at that point, because physically it was already breaking down and fast. So he came back 15 minutes later and told me, I am coming with you to the lab and we're going to get some blood work done. And the first thing I asked him is, am I going back to the United States? And he said, yes, no doubt about it. And this is where I started crying because I didn't want to leave. Honestly, although I was experiencing these symptoms, I was honestly having the time of my life in Honduras. And I remember he was like, okay, I already got in contact with your mom and dad and they're on the way. And like I said, I was completely out of touch with reality. So I wasn't even trying to put the puzzle pieces together that this was bad. So I remember getting my blood work done and the guy doing my blood work was looking at me so crazy. I mean, I looked very sick and he was like, is everything okay? And I was like, why is everyone asking me that? At that point, I had an attitude. As we know, 4-year-olds have attitudes. So I was like, well, clearly we're about to find out. So I get out of there and I get out of the lab and they immediately take me to the emergency room. And the nurse was taking my vitals and asked me, where are you coming from? Did you go run before this? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, your heart rate right now is 127. And that's like if you're running a marathon. And still, nothing was clicking. But at this point, the nurse was there and a whole bunch of other doctors started coming into the room and they looked highly concerned. So all of a sudden, not only were all these doctors arriving, but all of my family members were arriving and everyone honestly looked so scared. So I just remember these doctors all said that they were going into a meeting and they needed to talk to my family. And they came back with my blood test around this time and my hemoglobin was at 5. This is extremely low because, like I said, a normal hemoglobin is around 12. And I was at 5. And that I am in need of a blood transfusion before I get on a flight back to Houston. So I get this blood transfusion and honestly, this is the worst night of my life. It took a while for this blood transfusion to happen because the machine didn't work the way it was supposed to. So it was starting and stopping, and also my IV was in a horrible position. So I was actually experiencing a lot of pain with the IV. And I remember I was just so pissed and fed up with everyone. And I wasn't hiding it. I was really sick and I was really going through it and I was really frustrated. And the next morning, everyone was there. My parents were there. My family was there. And there were a bunch of doctors that were coming to look at me. And they were sugarcoating to me what was about to happen. But they were basically telling me I'm very sick. They were very concerned about how many lymph nodes I had, visible inflamed lymph nodes that I had, and that they wanted to send me to MD Anderson in Houston as soon as possible, but they needed to wait for me to get stabilized physically in order to send me to Houston. So now I know that their primary diagnosis was cancer, either lymphoma or leukemia. And after 2 days, they finally stabilized me. And on February 3rd, I made my way back to Houston to endure another 15 days of hell and uncertainty. So I'm going to end my part of the story there. But I just want to acknowledge, one, how strong I am and how strong I was. I was 16 going through all of this, and honestly, I went through hell, and I'm just grateful now that I get to look back a few years later with more wisdom and more appreciation, gratitude for life. And I'm honestly so grateful to be here and to be sharing my story. And I want to also point that it is important for me, and also this is important for all survivors of whatever illness. Never forget what you went through. Never forget about it. And every day, celebrate the life that you have, because we are truly survivors and troopers on this earth who have so much wisdom to share and so much love to give. So I know that it is a miracle that I am alive today. And I want to thank Dr. Moncada for being an expert at what he does and being able to recognize the signs that for some reason the other doctors were clearly missing. And I truly believe that if I hadn't gone on February 1st to go see him, that I would not be here today. And that is actually a fact. So in the next episode of my lupus story, I will have a very special guest here with me to tell my story more in depth and also give education about lupus. But that is it for this part of my story. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the Empowered Psychology community. I hope this episode opened your eyes to how awful of a disease lupus is and brought awareness to why we must fix and bring awareness to the health disparities that come with the illness. All of our social media links and contact information will be listed down below. Have a blessed day and live your best life, because life is a gift and you are one as well. I'll see you guys in the next part of my story. And yeah, I'll see you guys then. Okay, bye.